I used to be their backbone. Took the company from a cluttered Portland garage to knocking on NASDAQ's door. But then, one day, they called me into the glass room, looked at me like an outdated PowerPoint slide, and said, "We're moving toward a younger image." They fired me, called me too outdated for the new vision. I didn't cry, I didn't say a word. But 3 months later, on their IPO day, I made one phone call and watched them evaporate nearly $500 million on CNBC. My name is Amanda Keene, and at 38, I had built something most people only dream about. Not just code or algorithms, but the beating heart of a company that was about to change how businesses understand their customers. Linkstide wasn't just another AI startup cluttering up the Portland tech scene. It was my creation, my obsession, my life's work distilled into millions of lines of code. I remember those early days in Derek's garage. The four of us huddled around secondhand monitors, living on ramen and pure adrenaline. Derek, Marcus, and Raj. My co-founders, my brothers in arms. We weren't just colleagues, we were revolutionaries. While they handled the business side, pitched to investors, and smooth-talked their way through networking events, I built our empire's foundation, every core system, every elegant solution to impossible problems. Every breakthrough that made investors' eyes light up. That was me. Working 18-hour days, dreaming in Python and waking up to JavaScript. The algorithm that became our signature product, I wrote it during a 40-hour coding marathon, fueled by nothing but cold brew and determination. It could predict customer behavior patterns with 94% accuracy, unheard of in 2019. I didn't just write code, I birthed artificial intelligence that could see into the future of consumer habits. For 5 years, we were unstoppable. Series A, Series B, then the massive Series C that changed everything. $50 million from Apex Ventures. Suddenly, we weren't scrappy anymore. We had a real office in the Pearl District. Glass walls, exposed brick, the whole Silicon Valley satellite package. But with that money came new board members, new advisors, new pressure to fit a certain image. I watched it happen slowly, like frost creeping across a window. The hiring practices shifted. Every new face was younger, fresher out of Stanford or MIT. Marketing kept talking about our dynamic, youthful energy. In meetings, I'd catch the sidelong glances when I mentioned my daughter's school events or when the gray streaks in my hair caught the light. My hoodies and jeans, once the uniform of a serious coder, suddenly seemed frumpy next to the designer streetwear the new hires sported. The Thursday it happened. Portland was drowning in its typical February rain. I just pushed a critical update to our prediction model, improving accuracy by another 2.3%. I was riding high, ready to present the breakthrough at our board meeting. Instead, I got a Slack message. "Amanda, can you join us in conference room A?" They were all there. Derek, who I'd saved from bankruptcy when his first startup failed. Marcus, whose wedding I'd attended, whose kids called me Aunt Mandy. Raj, who still owed me $5,000 from when he couldn't make rent in 2018. And 2 board members I'd never learned to like, young men in identical Allbirds who looked at spreadsheets the way I looked at code. "Amanda," Derek started, and I knew from his tone, that careful, rehearsed quality, that this wasn't about my update. "We need to talk about Linkstide's future direction." The words came in corporate speak, wrapped in false concern and hollow gratitude. Pivoting toward a fresh perspective, aligning with market expectations for innovation leaders, grateful for your foundational contributions. But strip away the jargon, and the message was clear. You're too old. You don't fit our image anymore. You're dragging down our valuation. We need someone who resonates with the next generation of tech talent. One of the Allbirds twins said, not even bothering to look up from his phone. Someone who embodies the energy we want to project for our IPO roadshow. I sat there, feeling my heartbeat in my temples, watching rain streak down those beautiful glass walls I'd earned with my work. 5 years, 60-hour weeks, every optimization, every breakthrough, every line of code that made us worth $500 million. My algorithms, I started. will continue to be the backbone of our company. Marcus interrupted smoothly. Your contributions are baked into our DNA, Amanda, but it's time for fresh leadership to take us public. They offered me a severance package, of course, 3 months' pay and healthcare through Cobra. They made me sign papers, NDAs, non-competes, standard procedure, they said. I signed everything. I shook their hands. I even smiled when security escorted me out, my personal items already packed in a cardboard box like some cliché from a movie. But as I stood in that February rain, holding that pathetic box while my keycard was deactivated, watching through those glass walls as they went back to their meeting, probably already discussing my replacement, I felt something harder than sadness, colder than anger. I felt the first spark of what would become my revenge. The drive to Salem was a blur of rain and taillights. My sister Sarah opened her door before I could knock, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without a word. That's when I finally broke. Not graceful tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that left me gasping on her kitchen floor. 5 years of my life, dissolved in a 20-minute meeting. Those bastards, Sarah kept saying, rubbing my back while I hyperventilated into her shoulder. Those absolute bastards. I moved into her guest room, a fancy way of saying her home office with an air mattress. My daughter Chloe was away at college. Thank God she didn't have to see me like this. For 2 weeks, I barely left that room. I'd wake at 3 p.m., scroll through LinkedIn watching former colleagues announce their promotions, then fall back into fitful sleep, plagued by dreams of code that no longer belonged to me. Depression isn't cinematic. It's not artistic shots of staring out rain-streaked windows. It's wearing the same pajamas for 4 days. It's your sister leaving plates of food outside your door because you can't bear human interaction. It's checking Linkstide's website obsessively at 2 a.m., watching them erase every trace of your existence from their About Us page. The therapist Sarah dragged me to, Dr. Martinez, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, diagnosed me with adjustment disorder. It's not just losing a job, she explained. You've lost your identity, your purpose, your community. That's real grief. Real grief. That felt right. I was mourning something intangible, but profound. The version of myself who mattered, who built things, who was essential. 3 weeks in, the tech blogs started buzzing. Linkstide secures final funding round ahead of anticipated IPO. Portland AI darling set to go public. Meet the young visionaries taking Linkstide to Wall Street. That last article featured a splashy photo of my replacement, Katie Morrison, 29, fresh from Google with an MBA from Wharton. They described her as bringing fresh energy and innovative vision to Linkstide's technical leadership. Fresh energy. The words burned like acid in my throat. I started drinking, not socially, not casually, but with the dedication of someone trying to drown something that wouldn't stay submerged. Sarah found me passed out on the bathroom floor on a Tuesday afternoon, wine vomit in my hair. And that's when she issued her ultimatum. Therapy and AA, or you find somewhere else to fall apart. So I went to meetings. I sat in circles of strangers and listened to their stories of loss and redemption. I couldn't share my own, the NDAs made sure of that. So I spoke in generalizations. I lost my job. I lost myself. I'm trying to find my way back. It was at one of these meetings that I ran into Raymond Chen, not his real name, he'd joke, but the one he'd adopted after immigrating from Taiwan. I knew him from the Portland tech scene, a brilliant machine learning engineer who'd mysteriously disappeared from the circuit about a year ago. Amanda? He looked as surprised as I felt. What are you doing here? We grabbed coffee after the meeting. Decaf, our sponsors would be proud. And the story tumbled out. Not the details. I was too paranoid about the NDAs, but enough. His face darkened with each word. Let me guess, he said finally. They pushed you out right before the IPO. I nodded, surprised by his insight. Raymond laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. Same playbook they tried with me, except I had something they wanted, an optimization algorithm for their behavioral prediction model. When I wouldn't sell, They tried to steal it, sued me into silence when I pushed back. My blood chilled. The behavioral prediction model. Yeah, they were desperate to improve accuracy above 90%. Said it was make or break for their valuation. He studied my face. Wait, you don't know about this? But I did know. Because I'd solved that exact problem. My 40-hour marathon. My breakthrough algorithm that hit 94% accuracy. The timing lined up perfectly. They'd pushed Raymond out. Failed to steal his work. Then I'd independently created something better. Or had I? Raymond, I said slowly. What if they didn't need to steal your algorithm because they had mine? He frowned. But you were still there. Why would they need? His eyes widened. Unless they were planning to push you out all along. The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. Every late night, every breakthrough, every optimization I'd celebrated. Had I been building my own obsolescence? Creating the very tools that would make me expendable? That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from depression this time, but from a different kind of energy. I pulled out my laptop, the personal one they couldn't touch, and started digging. GitHub commits, archived Slack messages I'd forwarded to my personal email out of habit, documentation I'd written. And there it was, buried in the commit history, references to Project Fresh Start, dated 6 months before my termination. Code reviews for my algorithms assigned to that bright-eyed new hire, Katie Morrison. Architecture documents with my name scrubbed out, replaced with Team Lead TBD. They hadn't just fired me. They'd been planning it for months, systematically transferring my knowledge, preparing to cut me out like a tumor while keeping my life's work. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling of Sarah's guest room. Outside, Salem slept peacefully, unaware that in this modest suburban house, a former tech executive was transforming from victim to something else entirely. I wasn't just grieving anymore, I was planning. The investigation started with a simple question. What exactly did I sign? Sarah's printer churned out pages of my severance agreement at 3 a.m. while she slept. I spread them across her dining table like evidence in a murder case, armed with highlighters and a legal pad. The language was dense, designed to intimidate. But I'd spent years parsing complex code. Legal jargon was just another syntax to decode. There it was, buried in Section 7, subsection C. All work product created during employment remains property of Linkstide, Inc. Standard stuff. But the next line made my pulse quicken. Excluding any foundational algorithms or core architecture where employee retains joint intellectual property rights as per original founder agreements. My hands shook as I pulled up my laptop. The original founder agreements, did I still have copies? 10 minutes of frantic searching through old emails yielded gold. A PDF from 2019, digitally signed by all 4 founders. Article 12 was crystal clear. Any significant modifications to core algorithms required unanimous founder consent, and IP rights remained shared unless explicitly transferred in writing. They'd fired me. They'd humiliated me. But they'd forgotten I wasn't just an employee, I was a founder. And that distinction mattered. The next weeks blurred into a routine of obsessive investigation. I became a digital archaeologist, excavating layers of code and communication. My old Linkstide email was locked, but I'd been paranoid enough to BCC my personal account on anything important. Thank God for past Amanda's instincts. I reached out carefully to former colleagues, the ones who'd left Linkstide before me. Coffee shops in Portland became my office, each meeting revealing another piece of the puzzle. They made us sign new contracts in December, whispered Janet, a junior developer who'd quit in protest after my firing. Said it was for the IPO prep, but the clauses were weird. Something about affirming all code contributions as work for hire, retroactively. Katie's been struggling, another contact revealed. She's smart, but she can't maintain your code base. They've had 3 critical failures since you left. The prediction accuracy dropped to 91%. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source, Mikhail, the janitor who worked nights at the Pearl District office. I'd always treated him with respect, remembered his kids' names, brought him coffee during late coding sessions. He remembered. "Ms. Amanda," he said in his thick Russian accent, sliding a USB drive across the cafe table. "I clean many offices. Sometimes, people leave computers unlocked. Sometimes, I worry about corporate security, so I take screenshots. For safety." The drive contained 17 screenshots from various executives' computers, emails discussing Project Fresh Start, Slack messages about managing the Amanda situation. And most damning, a modified version of my core algorithm, uploaded to the production servers 2 weeks after my termination, with Katie Morrison listed as the sole author. But they'd been sloppy. The comments in the code, my comments, my variable naming conventions, even my quirky assy art signatures were still there. They'd literally copied and pasted my work, changed a few function names, and called it Katie's innovation. I cross-referenced everything with the GitHub history I could access. The commit logs told a story of desperation, Katie pushing dozens of breaking changes, reverting them, then mysteriously arriving at solutions identical to ones I'd implemented months earlier. Either she was psychic, or she was working from my original code. The final piece came from the patent office. Linkstide had filed for a patent on their revolutionary prediction algorithm, filed 1 week after my termination, with Katie Morrison and the CEO listed as inventors. My name was nowhere, but patents required disclosure of prior art. And I had emails, blessed, forwarded emails, showing I'd presented this exact algorithm to the board 6 months before Katie was even hired, complete with timestamps, digital signatures, the works. I compiled everything into a secure folder: contracts, code comparisons, emails, screenshots, patent filings. 67 documents that told a simple story. Linkstide had stolen my work, claimed it as their own, and bet their entire IPO on the assumption that I'd disappear quietly into the night. Raymond reviewed everything over encrypted messages. "This is it," he wrote. "This is actual fraud. Securities fraud if they're claiming this is proprietary tech for their IPO. But I needed one more thing: proof that the current production code was mine. For that, I needed inside access. It came from Leo, a systems engineer still at Linkstide who'd never forgotten how I'd covered for him during a major outage. "I can't give you access," he said carefully during our accidental meeting at a food cart. "But if someone were to check the public API endpoints at specific times, they might notice interesting responses that confirm certain architectural patterns." That night, I wrote a simple script to query Linkstide's public APIs. The responses came back with telltale signatures, error messages in my exact format, response patterns matching my architectural decisions, even a debug flag I'd left in that everyone had forgotten about. I sat back in Sarah's guest room, looking at the mountain of evidence glowing on my screen. 3 months ago, they'd discarded me like obsolete hardware. They'd stolen my work, my future, my identity. But they'd made one crucial error. They'd assumed I was just another employee, just another woman in tech who'd accept her fate and fade away. Just another casualty of their fresh vision. They were wrong. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found it. Harrison Chambers, the securities lawyer who'd given a talk at a Women in Tech event 2 years ago. He'd handed out business cards afterward, said to call if we ever needed help. I'd kept it, never thinking I'd need a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property theft and securities fraud. It was time to make some calls. Harrison Chambers didn't look like a corporate assassin. 73 years old, wearing a cardigan that had seen better decades. He served me tea in actual china cups in his home office overlooking the Willamette River. But his eyes, sharp as surgical instruments, told a different story. "I've been waiting 40 years for a case like this," he said after reviewing my evidence for 3 silent hours. "Clean fraud, documented theft, and they're about to go public with it. It's beautiful in its stupidity." "Can we stop them?" I asked. He smiled. And suddenly I understood why Fortune 500 companies feared him. "Ms. Keene, we're not going to stop them. We're going to let them hang themselves, and then we're going to pull the rope." The strategy was surgical. File too early, and they'd have time to maneuver, to bury the story in legal procedures. File too late, and the IPO would be complete, the damage minimized. But file at exactly the right moment, when the eyes of the financial world were watching. When every second of delay meant millions in losses, that was art. The SEC takes intellectual property fraud in IPOs very seriously, Harrison explained, pulling out precedents. Especially when the stolen IP is being marketed as the company's core innovation. One phone call to the right person, at the right time, and trading halts immediately pending investigation. But we needed more than legal action. We needed public pressure. That's where Miranda Walsh came in. Miranda was a senior tech journalist at Market Pulse, known for breaking the Theranos story before anyone else smelled blood. She owed me a favor. I'd given her deep background on algorithmic bias in fintech 2 years ago, helping her win a Polk Award. When I called, she answered on the second ring. "Amanda Keene," she said warmly. "I heard through the grapevine you left Links tied. Their loss." "Actually," I said, "that's what I'm calling about. How would you like an exclusive on the biggest IP theft attempt in Portland tech history?" We met at a hotel bar in downtown Portland, away from tech worker haunts. I laid out everything, the evidence, the timeline, the patents filed on stolen work. Miranda's eyes lit up like a hunter who'd spotted prey. "This is huge," she breathed. "A company about to IPO with fraudulent claims about their core technology, and they fired the actual inventor? It's perfect." "I need the story to break at a specific time," I said carefully. She grinned. "Let me guess, right when they're ringing the opening bell." "You understand perfectly." The plan crystallized over the next 2 weeks. Harrison prepared the SEC complaint. Dense with evidence and legal precedent, Miranda worked her sources, building a comprehensive story that would be impossible to ignore. I provided technical documentation, walking her through the code comparisons until she could explain the theft to a layperson. But I wanted more than legal victory. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt: the public humiliation, the professional destruction, the sense of everything crumbling in real time. That's when I remembered Diana Zhao, my former intern who now worked at a prominent venture capital firm. She'd been horrified by my firing, had even reached out to offer support. When I called her with a hypothetical question about IPO vulnerabilities, she was eager to help. "The thing about IPOs," she explained, "is that they're built on confidence. One credible accusation of fraud, especially about core technology, and institutional investors flee like rats from a burning building. The first day trading can make or break a company's public future." Perfect. I coordinated with Harrison and Miranda like a general planning an invasion. The SEC complaint would be filed at 9:27 a.m. Eastern, 3 minutes before market open. Miranda's article would go live at 9:28 a.m., pushed to Market Pulse's 2 million subscribers and automatically tweeted to their financial newsfeed. By 9:30 a.m., when Links Tide's executives were preparing to ring the opening bell, their phones would be exploding. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked the night before, finding me at the dining table surrounded by notes and timelines. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." I thought about the glass conference room, the practiced sympathy in Derek's voice, the way they'd erased me from the company I'd built. I thought about Katie Morrison, promoted on the strength of my stolen code. I thought about every woman in tech who'd been pushed out for being too old at 40. Every founder whose work had been stolen by smoother talkers with better connections. "They made their choice," I said. "They decided I was disposable, that my work could be stolen and repackaged with a younger face. They gambled everything on my silence." Sarah nodded slowly. "Give them hell." Harrison had one final piece of advice. "Don't be anywhere traceable when this happens. No digital footprints, no patterns they can follow. You want to be a ghost when their world explodes." So I booked a cabin in the Mount Hood wilderness, paid cash, told no one but Sarah where I was going. I'd watch their downfall from a place with no cell towers, no temptation to gloat online, no way for reporters to find me immediately. The night before IPO day, I couldn't sleep, I kept checking my phone, making sure everything was ready. Harrison confirmed receipt of all documents. Miranda showed me the draft of her article. Brutal, thorough, undeniable. The SEC contact was primed and waiting. At 4 a.m., I drove toward Mount Hood, watching Portland shrink in my rearview mirror. The city that had witnessed my rise and fall would soon witness something else entirely. My phone would make one call tomorrow, just one. But it would be enough. The cabin had no television, but the owner had left an old radio that could pick up NPR through the static. I made coffee at 5 a.m. Pacific, my hands steady despite the earthquake in my chest. Outside, Mount Hood loomed in the dawn light, indifferent to the corporate execution about to unfold. At 6:15 a.m., I drove down the mountain until I found a single bar of cell service. One bar was all I needed. I parked on a pullout overlooking the valley, engine running, heat on full. The phone sat on the dashboard like a loaded weapon. I'd memorized the number. Harrison had written it on a post-it, made me repeat it back 3 times. The direct line to the SEC's IPO fraud division, answered by an investigator named Patricia Chen, who was expecting my call. At 6:25 a.m. Pacific, 9:25 a.m. Eastern, I dialed. Patricia Chen, came the crisp voice. "This is Amanda Keene," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I'm calling regarding the Linkstide IPO scheduled to begin trading in 5 minutes. I have evidence of systematic intellectual property fraud material to their S-1 filing." "We've been expecting your call, Ms. Keene. Mr. Chambers sent the preliminary documentation. Are you confirming you wish to proceed with the formal complaint?" In that moment, I thought of Derek's kids, who called me Aunt Mandy. I thought of the employees who had nothing to do with this, who'd be collateral damage. For a heartbeat, I wavered. Then I remembered the security guard escorting me out, the box of my belongings, the phrase, "too outdated for our vision." "Confirmed," I said. "File the complaint." "Understood. The halt order will be issued immediately. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Keene." I hung up. 9:27 a.m. Eastern. The radio crackled with market news. I sat in my car, watching the sun creep across the valley, and waited. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern sharp, the NPR market update began. We're starting with breaking news from the New York Stock Exchange, where the highly anticipated Linkstide IPO has been halted just moments before trading was set to begin. The SEC has confirmed they're investigating allegations of intellectual property fraud. I turned up the volume. Market Pulse is reporting that the company's core AI technology, which formed the basis of their $500 million valuation, may have been stolen from a terminated co-founder. The allegations suggest. My phone began buzzing, calls from unknown numbers, reporters who'd somehow gotten my contact, texts from former colleagues. I turned it off and threw it in the glove compartment. The radio continued its coverage. By 10 a.m. Eastern, it was the lead story on financial news. Linkstide executives were literally standing at the podium, preparing to ring the opening bell when the halt was announced. One correspondent reported, "The CEO appeared visibly shaken, and the ceremony was canceled. We're seeing institutional investors pulling back across the board." I drove back to the cabin and spent the day hiking, letting the mountain silence fill the space where Linkstide used to live. But by evening, curiosity won. I drove back to my signal spot and powered on the phone. 147 missed calls, 89 text messages. The first one I opened was from Sarah. "Holy shit, Amanda, check the news when you can. You've destroyed them." I couldn't resist. I pulled up Market Pulse on my phone. Miranda's article was their top story, with over 2 million views. Exclusive. How Linkstide stole their star technology from the woman they fired for being outdated. The article was devastating. Miranda had woven together the technical evidence with the human story. My photo from better days. Quotes from former employees about my contributions. A timeline showing how my innovations had been systematically stolen. She'd even gotten a quote from a Stanford professor explaining how my algorithm was genuinely revolutionary, and how stealing it was not just unethical, but stunningly stupid from a legal perspective. But it was the market coverage that truly satisfied. CNBC's headline: Link's Tide valuation plummets 47% in private trading as IPO fraud scandal erupts. The financial press was brutal. Once they smelled blood, they attacked like sharks. Every outlet had picked up the story. The phrase, biggest IPO disaster since WeWork, appeared multiple times. By 8 p.m. Pacific, more details emerged. The CEO, Marcus Hutchinson, had been removed by an emergency board meeting. Katie Morrison, my replacement, the fresh energy, had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The SEC had seized servers from Link's Tide's offices. Multiple institutional investors had announced they were withdrawing from the IPO entirely. I found a text from Leo, the systems engineer who'd helped me. They're in full panic mode. Legal team took over the office. Everyone's being interviewed. Katie was crying in the bathroom. The board is talking about bankruptcy if they can't go public. Another from Janet. I can't believe you did it. You're my hero. They're saying Marcus might face criminal charges for securities fraud. But the message that made me smile came from Raymond. Just saw the news. Looks like someone pressed the right button at the right time. Proud of you, Amanda. Give them hell. I sat in my car as darkness fell over Mount Hood, watching the last light fade from the peaks. Somewhere in Portland, in those beautiful glass offices, my former partners were watching their dreams evaporate. The company built on my code, funded by my innovations, was collapsing because they'd tried to erase me from the story. The radio was still covering it at 11 p.m. In an unprecedented move, NASDAQ has announced that Link's Tide's IPO is postponed indefinitely pending SEC investigation. Legal experts say the company faces years of litigation and potentially criminal charges for securities fraud. The stunning fall from grace for what was considered Portland's most promising startup. I turned off the radio. Tomorrow. I'd have to face the aftermath, the lawyers, the reporters, the depositions. But tonight, alone on this mountain, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. They'd called me outdated, too old for their vision. But it only took one phone call to show them how wrong they were. One perfectly timed phone call to bring down an empire built on stolen foundations. I started the engine and drove back to the cabin, leaving the burning wreckage of Link's Tide behind in the darkness. My work here was done. The aftermath was quieter than the explosion. I returned to Salem 3 days later, finding news vans scattered around Sarah's neighborhood like vultures. I slipped in through the back door at 2 a.m., and we sat at her kitchen table, sharing a bottle of wine I wasn't supposed to touch. You're famous, she said, showing me her phone. My face was everywhere: tech blogs, financial news, even mainstream media. The woman who destroyed a unicorn was the most popular headline. But I didn't want fame. I wanted resolution. Harrison called the next morning. The SEC wants to interview you next week. Formal deposition. But don't worry, you're a witness, not a target. They're building a criminal case against the executives. Criminal? I hadn't expected that. Securities fraud is serious business. Amanda, they lied to investors about the origin of their core technology. That's federal prison territory. The news kept getting worse for Link's Tide. The board had hired a crisis management firm, but it was like trying to bandage a severed artery. 3 more executives resigned. Their lead investor, Apex Ventures, announced they were writing off their entire investment. Employees were jumping ship so fast that they couldn't maintain basic operations. Katie Morrison broke her silence with a teary interview on a tech podcast, claiming she'd been manipulated, that she didn't know the code was stolen. I thought Amanda had left documentation I could build from, she sobbed. They told me it was all properly transferred. I felt a flicker of sympathy until she added, besides, I improved on her work significantly. That killed any charitable feelings. She'd claimed my code as her own when it suited her. Now she was just another rat fleeing the sinking ship. The interview requests were relentless. 60 Minutes, TechCrunch, even international outlets. I turned them all down. Miranda Walsh had told my story perfectly. Anything else would be circus performance. But the legal machinery ground on. Harrison negotiated my settlement with surgical precision. The number he finally presented made me stare. $32 million, he said calmly. That's accounting for back pay, stolen IP, punitive damages, and future royalties on any products derived from your algorithms. That's insane. That's justice. They built a $500 million valuation on your work. This is actually conservative. But Linkstide didn't have 32 million anymore. Their valuation had cratered. Investors had fled. Operations were failing. Harrison explained the settlement would likely come from D&O insurance and the personal assets of the executives who'd orchestrated the theft. Derek Holman has already agreed to settle his portion, Harrison noted. Apparently, his wife threatened divorce if he didn't make this right. I thought of Derek's kids again. They'd have to change schools, probably. Their college funds would be gone, but their father had made his choices. The depositions were exhausting, but cathartic. For 8 hours, I walked federal investigators through every line of stolen code, every timestamp, every piece of evidence. The lead investigator, a sharp woman named Angela Torres, shook her head repeatedly. In 20 years of doing this, I've never seen such blatant theft. They didn't even try to hide it well. They thought I'd disappear, I said simply. They thought wrong. By April, 3 months after the failed IPO, Linkstide officially ceased operations. The bankruptcy filing was a formality. They'd been dead since that morning I made the call. The office in the Pearl District sat empty, their logo hastily removed, leaving only a ghost outline on the brick. Marcus Hutchinson and 2 board members were indicted on federal charges. The trial wouldn't start for another year, but Harrison assured me the evidence was overwhelming. He's looking at 5 to 10 years minimum, he said. The prosecutor wants to make an example. The money started flowing in May. Not the full amount, that would take years to fully collect, but enough to change everything. I paid off Sarah's mortgage first, despite her protests, set up college funds for my daughter and her kids, donated a significant sum to organizations supporting women in tech. But I didn't touch most of it. It sat in accounts, feeling more like evidence than wealth. The job offers came with the vindication. Google, Microsoft, even some startups that saw my story as proof of brilliance rather than baggage. They offered impressive titles, significant equity, promises of autonomy. I turned them all down. You're joking, Sarah said when I told her. After everything, you're not going back. I'm not done with tech, I clarified. I'm done with their version of it. The last update came in June. An email from Janet, my former junior developer. Thought you should know, Katie Morrison is working at a mall kiosk selling phone cases. She lists AI specialist on her LinkedIn, but nobody will touch her after the scandal. Also, Derek's living with his brother in Beaverton. His wife did divorce him. Marcus is under house arrest awaiting trial. You destroyed them all. Amanda. Completely. I read the email twice, waiting to feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt empty. Not regret. They'd earned every consequence. But the revenge I'd thirsted for had left me hollow. They were destroyed. Yes, but I was still the woman fired for being outdated, still carrying that scar. That night, I sat on Sarah's porch, watching suburban Salem sleep. My phone buzzed. Another reporter, another job offer, another reminder of what I'd done. I let it ring out. The empire had fallen. The guilty were punished. Justice had been served with surgical precision. So why didn't I feel victorious? The answer would come later, in an unexpected place. But that night, I simply sat with my expensive revenge, wondering if destroying them had been worth the piece of myself I'd lost in the process. September arrived with unusual clarity in Oregon. I stood in front of 22 students at Portland Community College, teaching Introduction to Machine Learning. Not MIT, not Stanford, just a small classroom filled with kids who couldn't afford prestigious universities, but burned with the same hunger I'd once carried. Who can tell me why this algorithm failed? I asked, pointing to the code on the projector. A young woman in the back, Maria, first-generation college student, working 2 jobs, raised her hand tentatively. Because it's overfitting? It's memorizing instead of learning? Exactly. I smiled, remembering my own stumbling first attempts. The algorithm got so focused on perfection with existing data that it couldn't adapt to anything new. Sometimes, being too rigid makes you brittle. The irony wasn't lost on me. After class, 3 female students lingered. They always did. These young women navigating tech's hostile waters. They'd heard my story. Everyone had, but I never brought it up. Until today. When Aisha, brilliant but uncertain, asked the question they'd all been dancing around. Professor Keene, was it worth it? The revenge? I considered lying, giving them the triumphant narrative they expected. Instead, I pulled up a chair. I got justice, I said carefully. They paid for what they stole. But revenge is like overfitting an algorithm. You optimize for one outcome so hard that you lose sight of everything else. But they deserved it, Maria protested. They did. And if I had to do it again, I probably would. But here's what the tech blogs don't tell you. I spent months of my life focused on destroying them instead of building something new. That's time I'll never get back. I looked at their young faces, seeing myself 20 years ago. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's becoming so good, so essential, that they realize what they lost. It's building something they could never have created. That evening, I worked on my real project. Not for any company, not for profit. An open-source platform teaching AI ethics and development to underrepresented communities. Free, accessible. Everything Linkstide's expensive conferences had never been. My former colleagues from the glory days contributed code. Even Raymond helped with the machine learning modules. Learning Loop, we called it. Simple name. Powerful concept. Education that feeds back into the community, creating more teachers, more builders, more voices that couldn't be silenced for being outdated. The platform launched quietly, but within weeks, thousands of users signed up. Single mothers learning Python during night shifts, veterans transitioning to tech careers, kids from reservations accessing the same education as Silicon Valley prep schools. Katie Morrison applied for instructor access. I saw her name in the queue, recognized the desperation in her cover letter. She needed redemption, a way back into tech. For a moment, my finger hovered over the deny button. Then I approved it. Not forgiveness, pragmatism. She knew my systems better than anyone except me. Let her teach what she'd claimed to create. Let her give back to the community she'd helped damage. Derek reached out once, through LinkedIn. A long, rambling message about mistakes and family and redemption. I archived it unread. Some bridges deserve to stay burned. But mostly, I taught community colleges, coding boot camps, wherever they'd have me. My students didn't care that I'd been fired for being outdated. They cared that I could show them how to build, how to persist, how to protect their work. One afternoon, grading assignments in my small office, I realized something had shifted. The anger was gone. Not forgotten, but transformed into something useful. Every student I mentored was a small victory over the system that had tried to discard me. Marcus was convicted on 3 counts of securities fraud, 5 years federal prison, minimum security. The news barely registered. I was too busy debugging code with a student who reminded me of myself at 22. Hungry, brilliant, underestimated. Professor, she asked during office hours, what's the most important thing you've learned? I thought about glass offices and stolen code, about perfect revenge served cold, about the hollow victory of destroying those who'd wronged you. That building something new is always more powerful than tearing something down, I said. They fired me for being outdated. But here I am, teaching the future. They're in prison or disgrace. Who's outdated now? She grinned and returned to her code. Outside my window, Portland hummed with new startups, new dreams, new chances for betrayal and triumph. But in this small office, with students learning to build rather than destroy, I'd found something better than revenge. I'd found purpose. The code on my screen wasn't worth billions. It wouldn't IPO or make headlines. But every time a student messaged about landing their first tech job, every time someone said my platform had changed their life, I knew the truth. Sometimes you don't need to destroy an empire. You just need to build something better where its ashes used to be. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. What would you have done in Amanda's position? Looking forward to our discussion.